I want to do some practice involving structure types in C, and so I'm going to go over and ask ChatGPT to help me out and come up with some ideas. I want to do a sort of mixture of the exercises it typically gives, which is basically a brief prompt that says, write a program that does this, using structure types. I want to do a little bit of that, but I also want to do at least one example of it giving me some code, so some starter code, and me having to modify it or fill in the blanks. Because I think with structures, one way to get comfortable with them is to build some dexterity working with structure types that somebody else has come up with, because structure types are a way of organizing data, and one of the hard things when we're working with code is dealing with organization designed by somebody else, because they might have a different way of organizing their data than you do. So let's see, we'll ask it, I want some practice with structure types in C. Can you generate 3 programming exercises involving structure types where I'm just going to ask for where one exercise involves some starter code that I can complete. I better remind it, because I talked about code, I better remind it to not give me the solution. Don't show me the solutions. Of course, here are 3 programming exercises involving structure types. Now we'll see whether it actually understood my request. Okay, exercise 1, struct for student information. I guess in the last video we saw this, it suggested student information. I think just like me after a long semester, it's beginning to run out of creative ideas. Okay, so this looks all right. So it takes input for 5 students' information. Okay, that's actually sort of nice. Writing a program that took an arbitrary number of student records would require a little bit of material that we haven't seen yet. So I'm actually sort of pleased that it was able to see ahead of that. That looks like a good exercise 1. Exercise 2, book inventory system. Just define a structure named book with members' title, author, year, and price. Write a program that initializes, okay, this is looking a little bit similar to exercise 1. All right, I will do it. I reserve the right to copy and paste a bit of code out of exercise 1 to make exercise 2. Exercise 3, point and distance calculation. Create a structure named point with members x and y, both of type float. Write a program that defines 2 points, calculates the distance between them using the distance formula, and displays the result. Here is the start code for exercise 1 that you can complete. So it looks like what's happening here, oh yeah, this is actually great. Yeah, okay, so it's asking me to create my own structure type, but it's also asking me to fill in the blanks in a couple of places to use that structure type. So that looks great. All right, so let's get started with exercise number 1. Okay, so I want to make a structure called student, and we're going to be reading data from the user. Now, I'm foreseeing that that's going to make testing a bit of a pain, but we will do it. Okay, we'll go over here. We'll just paste this in. There we go. I'll just format it nicely here. There we go, write a program that takes input for 5 students' information, stores it in an array of student structures, and then displays the information for each student. So it's an open-ended prompt. It doesn't require me to use functions or to not use functions. However, when we begin writing programs this big, I want to write some functions for them. It's not as obvious a breakdown as it was in the last video. So when we talked about file I/O, there were those exercises that sort of naturally segmented into a bunch of functions. But I think it looks to me as if I'm going to want to, first off, make this structure, obviously. Then I'm going to want to write a program that takes input for 5 students' information. It seems to me like I should use a function to actually read in the data. And then I should also write a function to display the information for each student. I'm probably going to write the function that displays information first, because that makes it easier to test. I won't be able to test any of the other stuff until I have some way of printing out the data that I have. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is create a structure named student with the following members. So I read this a particular way because I have a bias, and you know this because you're in my course, and I've already talked about the way I like to define structure types. And I will observe, if we scroll down in ChatGPT's suggestion, it looks like ChatGPT wants to define its structures using so-called old-style structure notation. Now, there's a separate video where I talk all about this, but I don't tend to prefer that. I tend to like to use typedef to define my structures. And interestingly, this prompt is sort of hinting, in at least my interpretation of the prompt, it's saying, make a type called student. I guess it's saying create a structure named student. But I read this as I want the type to just be student. So if I want to create an array of student objects, I'll just create student, let's see, we'll call it student array. of size 5. And here, the type of the element type of the array is just student. And so that hints to me that I'll want to define my structure using the new style structure notation. So I'm going to define it this way. Now, whether or not that's what ChatGPT meant, we'll get a chance to experiment with old style notation when we get to exercise 3. Okay, so I'm going to make a struct called student, type def struct, and then the contents will go here, and it's going to be student. Now, the student structure is going to have the following members: a name, a roll number, okay, and marks. It's unclear what it means by roll number. I guess this is going to be student number, and then marks is plural, which implies to me that it's going to be an array of some kind, or ChatGPT made a mistake. So I'm going to go ask for a clarification on that. This is exercise 1. Okay, so the way I'm going to resolve roll number, because I know already that I don't want to argue with ChatGPT over semantics because it doesn't know how to do that. Instead, I'm going to ask it for an example of input and figure out by context what roll number is supposed to mean. But I believe this is probably just supposed to be a student ID number. I think the same will be true of marks. Maybe it'll be clear what it means by marks if I ask it for an example of how exercise 1 is supposed to work. For exercise 1, can you show me a few examples of input and expected output? And as usual, don't show me the solution to the exercise. It really ruins it when it shows me the solution. And hopefully that clarifies it. Okay, so it says enter information for 5 students. Okay, student number 1, name John. Okay, roll number 101, marks 85.5. All right, student 2, name Mary, roll number 102, marks 92.0. Student number 3, name Alex. Okay, so a couple of observations. So, okay, it looks like it doesn't understand what I was asking, so it's mixing together input and output. It looks like the input is this green text and the output is the red text. A couple of observations. One of them is, we actually saw this last time as well. So last time I asked ChatGPT to generate for me some sample data, and some of the data that it came up with involved people's names. And it's doing that again here. It's generating data involving names of people. And one interesting aside, so it's not really a programming exercise, but one neat thing to sort of observe, neat and also a little bit horrifying, is that it's actually sort of clear that ChatGPT has a certain bias here. That is, it's generating a lot of names that might be common in certain parts of the world, but not in others. That's sort of weird. Isn't ChatGPT supposed to have learned the entire corpus of human knowledge off of whatever it's digested from the internet? How odd that when I ask it to generate names, it seems to generate names that, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but might be the names of people in like an elementary school class 50 years ago in, I don't know, like, you know, Midwestern America or something. That's a little bit weird. And that's actually one of the things that people doing research into the implications of having AI interact with us the way that it does, those researchers are sort of considering this inherent bias that AIs have seemed to demonstrate. It's also interesting to consider, also as an aside, that generative AIs, including things like ChatGPT, so AI systems that you can converse with, actually have to have a whole bunch of protections built into them, because if they try and learn from information out there on the internet, or if they try and engage directly in conversation with humans without those protections, they often say things that are incredibly offensive and developed this weird bias way outside of what we would expect sort of a typical human to have. And that says a lot of things, either about what information is out there on the internet, that is, why is it that when we create a new AI, it becomes racist so quickly? And it also says a few things about maybe we're making the wrong assumptions about the types of things that typical humans actually believe. Maybe subconscious bias is actually a lot more evident in the information that humans generate that AI then digests. Okay, whatever, but I digress. We're going to have to deal with the fact that ChatGPT is generating some names that seem to be localized to a certain part of the world, whatever. Here is our sample for exercise 1. I don't want to make the whole video about this digression, although it's an interesting observation, interesting and also a little bit creepy. What I will observe, though, is that it does seem like roll number is a student number, I guess. It doesn't look like ChatGPT has been very creative about these, so I'm going to define roll number to be the equivalent of what we call a student number at UVic. However, I will define it to be an integer because that's what the exercise said. Now, marks is pluralized, and yet every time that every sample input I've been provided seems to only have one mark. So I'm going to ask it to clarify that, fully expecting that it's going to get confused and will go around in circles. In the exercise, you asked me to create a member marks. Since the variable name is pluralized, I thought you might want an array of marks. But in your sample input and output, each student had only one mark. Now, I feel like the way I phrase this, so I'm slowly learning, I'm reverse engineering ChatGPT's interactions. Now, this isn't a really useful skill to have because we're working with ChatGPT 3.5 because I'm too cheap to pay for the more expensive, more modern version. But I'll bet that in the newer versions of ChatGPT, it doesn't necessarily have the same set of faults, of weird idiosyncrasies. One idiosyncrasy I've observed is that if I make a statement that has a sort of leading implication. So this statement is not saying that I want marks to be pluralized, but it's saying that I originally thought marks was pluralized, and that was my interpretation. In your input, you gave me something else. It's sort of implying that maybe I think marks should be plural, and it's wrong. And I feel like if I say it this way, it's going to say, oh, you're right, marks should be plural, it was wrong. I don't know if I want it to refine the exercise that way, so I'm going to try and neutralize that a little bit. Is it, should I store marks as a single value or some kind of array? Even that might imply that I want to use an array here. I don't know that I do, but we'll see what it says. I apologize for any confusion. Okay, we're always off to a good start when it starts apologizing. In the exercise description, I intended for marks to be a single value representing the score or grade for each student. Okay, good. So it is standing its ground. Good for it, right? I hope that overall this time it's learned that I'm actually quite receptive to it telling me what to do. I just want an exercise. I don't need it to do everything my way. So I should store marks as a single floating point variable for each student, just like in the sample input and output. Now, as a courtesy, I'm going to say, do you mind if I call that member mark instead of marks? Because I wouldn't be able to sleep at night using plural for something that's singular. Of course, you can absolutely. So, I mean, I don't know why I sort of was hoping it would disagree and I could fight with it, but of course it's going to allow me to do that. A sort of note about exercises. In the event that the exercise requires you to use a stupid name for something, you pretty much have to do that. I mean, there are reasons sometimes that we do that. I don't like grammatically incorrect names where I can avoid them. But if the exercise says you call it marks, then you have to call it marks. So that's why I had to ask it for permission to just call it mark singular. Okay, we'll go back over and actually do some programming. Okay, I'm going to change this. It's now called mark. Roll number, I'm going to leave the same. I'll put a comment in the structure next to it to explain what I think it is. Oh yeah, and one last thing. I'm going to need name to have a finite, a fixed constant length. If I ask ChatGPT for clarification on the length of student names, I expect that it will tell me maybe, hey, a student name could be literally any length at all. You can't give name a fixed length in the structure definition. The problem is the way that we have names of variable lengths, so creating arrays inside structures of arbitrary sizes, requires the next topic. So rather than ask it for clarification, I am just going to have to make the executive decision that name is going to have a maximum length of 100 characters. So I make the string of length 101. So 100 characters plus a null terminator. So note, names have a maximum length of 100 characters. Now, if you're watching this and thinking this is a cop-out and you want me to prove that I do know how to make names of arbitrary lengths, come by the office hours, we can talk about it. I expect that in the next set of exercises, so after our next topic, which is the thing we need to do it in a more general way, we'll probably get exercises that require that. So we'll see that at some point, just not in this video. All right, and then int roll number. This is equivalent to a student ID, except that at UVic, student IDs begin with the letter V, as far as I know. As of the recording of this video, they might be usually it's, well, these days it's V0 followed by 7 digits. And so formally, that's actually probably should be stored in a string. So at UVic, if we're storing a student ID, we don't know this V isn't going to change to a W or something later. So we should store it as a string. But the example we've been given says store the student ID as an int. Okay. And then finally, the mark is just going to be a float. Float mark. Okay. I've observed before that in practice, we really shouldn't use type float. If we need floating point data, if we need real numbers, we should pretty much default to double. There are a lot of cases where float is useful, but they don't tend to show up in problems like this. So often you might use float instead of double because you don't care about precision or because you care a lot about speed. If you're doing a horrendous amount of computation and you don't care about the accuracy of that computation so much as getting it done quickly, so one example of that might be real-time computer graphics or something, then you might use float. But in a context like this, when you're learning to program, especially in an engineering context, you should default to double. The exception to that is if you're told to use float, then you use float. So we're going to use float here. And also I would observe that if we're dealing with student marks, I don't really need more than 7 significant digits to store a student mark because, you know, at UVic, our final marks are just stored as integers anyway. So it's not harmful to use float here. Even if I thought it was, too bad. ChatGPT told me to use float. And for some reason, despite arguing with ChatGPT and making all sorts of other executive decisions, here is where I'm going to say, no, you've got to follow the directions. So I write a program that is going to take input for 5 students' information and store it in an array of student structures. Before I do that, I want to be able to print out the data when I'm done, because that'll allow me to test it. So I'm going to write a function to do that, print student. And then it's going to take as its argument a pointer to a student object. We'll just call it S. And I'll find some way of printing the student out. I guess because I was given sample output, I could use that as the basis for my output. So it looks like, I'll use, this one looks familiar, student number 4. So it looks like when I print each student, the format for the student data itself is one line saying name, then roll number, and then marks. I'm interested in learning. So ChatGPT clearly is calling this roll number because of something it's picked up elsewhere. I mean, ChatGPT has just aggregated a huge amount of information generated by people and automated systems over the years. So things on the internet, and it's learned from that. Apparently somewhere they call this roll number. I'm not sure where, but not here, I guess. So I'm going to generate output in this format. I'm actually going to copy this and just drag it over here and then use this as a template for my output. Okay, so I'll do printf, and I print out the name, and then we'll just print out %s, and then, whoops, %s. And then S arrow name. So the variable S here is a pointer to student object. And that means if I want to access the members of the student object that it points to, I can use the arrow operator. I don't have to. I could also use the star operator and a dot, but go look at the lecture videos for an explanation of why I personally tend to prefer the arrow operator. And I suspect many of you do as well. So I'm going to do that. S arrow name, and then I print out the roll number. There we go, roll number, and I'll just replace this with a placeholder. That's an integer, so it's %d, S arrow roll number. And then finally, marks. Okay, I'm not going to write marks. I'm going to write mark with singular. And then it looks like we want it to 1 decimal place. So I can do that. I mean, I could print it as just a float with %f, but by now we do know that if I want only 1 decimal place, I can use %.1f, and that results in the printf, when it generates the actual output, it will make sure it displays only 1 decimal place. And you know, I think that's all I need to print out a student. And before I go further and start reading the students, I'm going to test that out. So I'm going to first make a single student object, we'll just call it st, and I will set it to, I'll set its name. Well, why don't we just do William again, and then William was student number 204, and William's grade was 93, I think, 93.2. So I'll try initializing the student object, and then I'll call print student to see what happens. So I give it the address of st, arrow pointing at st, because this st is type student, and I want type student star. Okay, we'll try running that. Obviously, that warning can be ignored because I haven't written any code that uses that stuff yet. I'm getting there. And it prints it out. This is pretty much the same format that I'm expected to use. Okay, so that looks good. That's evidence that when I use my print student function later, it's not going to fall flat on its face. I mean, it might still have a mistake in it, but hopefully this test is enough to demonstrate that it seems to generally work. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of work backwards. My goal in the program is to input, for the user to input information for 5 students, and then I display the information for all 5 students. What I'm going to start with is actually displaying the information and then just hard coding the 5 students. And then I can, as time goes by, I can work my way backwards to have the user actually generate that. Okay, so I'm going to fill in my student array with information for 5 students. So Jupyter Hub really hates the indentation that I want to do here. It unindents for me when I do this. There's William. Okay, and then student number 204, 93.2, was it? I don't know why I care that much. Well, I mean, I guess it's Williams, so I'm sort of taking it personally. What I'm going to do is just I'm going to fill this in with 5 entries, and I don't really need to give them realistic names. And I'm self-conscious now because I think if I try to give them realistic names and I end up generating the same set of rather homogeneous names that ChatGPT does, then I'll just be part of the problem. So instead, I'm just going to generate meaningless gibberish because I'm blanking on any names except for William. Okay, and then there's some more meaningless gibberish, and I'll make sure that some of the students have different student numbers. I will try generating some student numbers that are longer. I'll even try generating student numbers that don't make any sense, like -1. Arguably, I might want to later, when the user enters the input, reject any student numbers that are negative. Although I don't think I will do that in this exercise because it doesn't say that student numbers can't be negative. And we know that student numbers often have weird idiosyncratic format, like at UVic where they begin with the letter V. Okay, so there's that. I'll also try a variety of different marks. So again, in this case, although it appears as if the mark is supposed to be between 0 and 100, it doesn't say that explicitly. It doesn't say this is supposed to be their final mark, does it? Maybe it does. Yeah, it doesn't really say that. It just says the grade for each student. And we know that there could be assignments or projects that are out of more than 100 marks, so I'm not even going to do any error checking on that. So I therefore want to be able to handle things like, what if their mark is 200? What if their mark is, that person gets a 0, that's too bad. Here's somebody who got 50.1, so just barely passed, good for them. And then we'll try, let's see, I need at least one other. And so William's doing very well in this class, that's good to hear. There's somebody who got 90% even. And I don't know, there's somebody that got 79.4. Okay, so I'm going to try this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to generate this stack of output statements where it prints student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4, student 5, and then I assume calls print student on each one of them. So I'm just going to count to 5. I'm going to write a loop that counts to 5. I guess I'm going to print out student information first. Now, what doesn't make sense about what ChatGPT did, I guess, was, so it says enter information for 5 students and then reads in all the data. And so all of this is input, or the right-hand side of each of these things is input. And then I guess afterwards, the program prints all this stuff out. It's weird. ChatGPT didn't, I don't think it fully understood what it was doing here, but I guess I understand. Okay, so it's going to print student information and then a list of students numbered starting at 1. So I'll do that in main. Okay, student information. And then I'm going to write a loop that counts to 5. Well, starts at 1 and counts up to 5, so I equals 1. I is less than or equal to 5. We haven't seen a less than or equal to loop in a few weeks. And then I plus plus, and then I will just print out, using this printf statement here, I will print out the student that I'm printing. Okay, and I just realized there is going to be a bit of a quirk here, which is that I obviously want to start at index 0 of my student array, but I want to print that out as being student number 1, because apparently the numbering starts at 1. So I could do that by counting from 1 up to 5, and then indexing in with 1 in, like starting when I is set to 1, I get index 0. When I is set to 2, I get index 1. But actually, personally, I'd rather do it the other way around. So I would rather count from 0 up to 4, and then when I print out which student I'm at, I'll just print I plus 1. So I will still be counting starting at 1. I'm just changing what the index is referring to. Okay, so then I'll do student array. I'll pass that into print student array sub I. So arrow pointing at student array sub I will give me a value of type student star that I can pass to print student. And if I don't believe that, then I could always just try running this now that I have a test set up for that purpose. All right, so it looks stupid because of all the names that I made up, but we can see it is printing there's student number 1, student number 2, student number 3, and the values are coming out looking correct. We are even seeing them to 1 decimal place. Let's see what happens if I generate a bunch of extra decimal places there. I want to make sure it still displays only 1 decimal place. Okay, and it does. So now I can keep working backwards, and instead of initializing the array myself, I can read each student's data from the user. Now, the way I'm going to do that, I think, is I'm going to write a function that reads 1 student's information and then just call it 5 times. So I'm basically going to do a mirror image of this loop here. I don't know whether it's a better idea to start by testing this out. I think I should start by testing this out on reading 1 student. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out everything I have. And I'm going to write a quick test case that just reads a single student. So we'll call it st again. I'm going to do read student. And then I'll provide it the address of st. So I could also make the read student function return a student object. It could create one internally and return it. But I guess, I don't know, my C instincts tell me that I'd rather create it on the outside and pass it in. And then I'm going to call print student on, again, st. Before that, I will keep the print statements that tell me when I'm reading and when I'm writing, and I observe that it does require me here to print out enter information for 5 students. So I'll do that. Enter information, is it capitalized? Nope. Enter information for, well, I guess for now I'll say for 1 student. And then I'll call read student, and hopefully whatever that does, it works. And then I'll print out the student that I read, just to make sure read student works correctly. Okay, so read student looks like this. So when I call read student, it doesn't return anything. Instead, I take a pointer to something, which I then modify myself. And it looks like from the way ChatGPT formatted the sample input, I guess what I'm supposed to do is print out name, and then the user enters Sarah, roll number, and the user enters 201, marks, and the user enters 89. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to steal these print statements for that purpose. So instead of printing out the name, I just print a prompt saying name, and then I stop. All right. Okay, that's not what I expected to happen. Mark, okay. And then after I printed this prompt, I'm going to read using scanf some data. So we will actually, I think just like we've done before, I am going to plan to do some error checking of what scanf reads. And I could do that in 2 ways. So my goal is, just like before, we don't want to belabor the error checking too much. I want to detect errors. If an error occurs, I'm willing to just bail out of the program, and that's the user's problem. They have to start the program over again. I don't want to do what ChatGPT has suggested I do in a couple of other exercises, where I give the user a second chance. I say, okay, you didn't enter a roll number, try again. Try again, try again, try again. I don't care. The user can restart the program. That's their problem. They deserve some feedback to say they did something wrong, but that's it. If they're inconvenienced a bit, well, then maybe they learn a lesson about making sure to generate the right input. So I'm going to use scanf to read the name, and then I'm going to think about the best way to deal with that error. So I guess I have 2 options. So first I'll write my scanf call. I'm going to read the name is of length 100, or at most 100 plus the null terminator. So I'm going to use scanf with %100s. I'm going to read into s arrow name. If that doesn't return 1, I ask for 1 item, that string. If that doesn't return 1, then I have a problem. Now the question is, how do I handle this error? So one way I could handle it is just print out an error message and exit the program immediately. That's not a name. Okay, and then I could just call the exit function, which is a way of bailing out of the program instantly from anywhere you want. I could do that. Alternatively, I could have this function return a value after all, and the value it returns is a status of whether it was successful or not. I think I'm going to do that. In general, for error handling, it's usually better. This is not a universal statement. There are lots of cases where it's better to do it the way I've highlighted, but in general, it's usually better to have a function stay in its lane. So the function's job is to try and read a student. If reading a student fails, then it shouldn't be necessarily the function's responsibility to decide how that error gets handled. It could be that main has different ideas about how to handle the error depending on when it occurs. And for that reason, it's often better, usually better, to have the function simply say, sorry, I couldn't finish. So I'll have the function return 0 if it fails to read a full student's record. record. Because of this, one quirk of this is when I print an error message out in main, I won't be able to be as specific about exactly what went wrong. There are ways around that, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to have the function return a value depending on whether it succeeded or failed. If I get all the way to the end, that means that it succeeded. Okay, so I read the name, and then I'm going to try and read the roll number, and that's going to be an int, so I use %d, and I provide, so when we want to read an int, we're reading it into a single variable, so I have to provide a pointer to s arrow roll number. There we go. And then if that doesn't work, then I'm going to return 0. Okay, and then finally down here, I'm going to read the mark, and the mark is a float. And so I'm going to do S arrow mark. One note about scanf, so one thing that often catches people off guard, one thing that even I sort of quickly I had a quick flash of panic about, is unlike with printf, when you use printf to print out real values, you can use %f for both floats and doubles due to a sort of weird design decision that's been in the language since basically the beginning. When you use scanf, though, float and double are different things, and scanf needs to know which type of thing it's reading. It needs to know what type your variable is exactly. So when you use %f with scanf, you are giving it a variable of type float. That's it, not double. If you want to read a double, you have to use %lf. Now, %lf also works for printf. You could use that to print doubles, but in practice, we're sort of lazy and we don't. So %f should be the correct format specifier for float, but if I were reading a double, this wouldn't be what I want to use. Okay, so I've got my read student function set up. I'm just going to try running this brief test case to make sure that it basically works. Okay, I will go fix my typo. Where was that mistake made? Oh, I've been using a lot of colons instead of semicolons lately. Okay, now it compiles. I run the program, enter information for one student. I'm going to stick with William. Roll number, what was that, 204, I guess? And the mark was 93.2. Okay, and it prints out that information. And because I know how it's being printed as integers and floats, I know that this information must be being read correctly. That's enough of a test case for me to keep moving. I obviously want to do a bit more testing, but this is enough for me to know that read student is probably generally correct. Okay, so I'm going to rearrange my code a little bit. I'm going to bring back the code that I commented out a minute ago. I've got my array of size 5. I'm now going to print out enter information for 5 students. And then I'm going to use basically the same loop that I have down here to read the students. I'm going to print out student number 1, student number 2, student number 3, and just call read student on all of them. Okay, and so I'll delete this. There we go. We'll try compiling it, see if that works. All right, actually, and what I want to do here is I'm going to create, I'll just make, whoops, okay, that's not what I just want to put some text somewhere to test something out. So I want to actually use the same test case that ChatGPT gave me. So I'm going to go grab it and just bring it over. So it wants me to enter these 5 students. So I will do that. We'll copy this, we'll bring it over. I'm just going to put it in the second pane over here. I'm going to try and enter these things because I want to observe also that when it prints everything out, when it generates the prompts, it generates the same prompts here, except that marks is not going to be pluralized. I already talked about that. Okay, so I'm going to run this, enter information for 5 students. Okay, we'll start with Sarah, roll number 201, mark is 89.0. Student number 2, so it goes right onto the prompt for student number 2. Name is Michael, roll number 202, 75.5, and name is Emily. Okay, roll number is 203, and marks is 81.7. Student number 4, there's William, roll number 204, 93.2, and student number 5 is Sophia, roll number 205, and mark 87.8. The program just suddenly ends. Oh, actually, okay, so the program didn't just suddenly end. What happened was it generated a whole ton of output quickly, and it looked like it ended because what it dumps out when I'm done is basically the same as what I typed in. But we can see here it prints student information. Student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4, student 5. Let's see what happens if I try I'm going to try some other inputs here. So one of them I'm going to do is the same set of inputs. I'm just going to put them in a different order because ChatGPT has given me a test case where the roll numbers are all in order. I've already tested that I can use roll numbers that aren't 202, 203, whatever, but I'm just going to do a test of the input version of this, that I can enter them in an arbitrary order and it still seems to work. Student number 2, for that one we'll do Emily. Roll number 203. Mark is 81.7. Student number, now we'll do Sarah. So Sarah is 201. Mark is 89.0. Student number 4 is, we'll do Sophia for that, 205, 87.8. And then finally we'll do William. Roll number is 204, 93.2. Press enter, and again, it looks like it does nothing, but actually it just generates all this stuff really quickly. And as I said, it's sort of uncomfortable. It's a weird observation that when ChatGPT wants to generate a bunch of people's names, it generates these names that are, I don't know, very demographically biased. As I said, this is the kind of thing where there was... Maybe the most charitable interpretation of this, as I alluded to earlier, is ChatGPT has digested huge amounts of information. Maybe some of the information it digested was a huge swath of millions of public records from the United States or Canada going back 50 or 100 years. And those public records, in some cases, due to issues that are very challenging to deal with outside of the context of a programming course, are often biased in favor of certain demographics. That is, the public records that exist tend to favor certain demographics over others because of the horrible systemic bias that exists, and AIs pick up on that. And what's even more weird and creepy, but also in a certain way actually sort of interesting in that it reveals this, is that this is a way that we can observe and have evidence of these biases existing. That, even if we think that, for example, that maybe this set of names doesn't reflect the diversity of society, and therefore it's sort of weird that ChatGPT generated, when it needed 5 names, it generated these 5 names. Well, that gives us some evidence that in the corpus of all human information, there might exist some biases, and those biases might have to do with the way that records are kept, or who kept records, or whose records were kept around. So lots of civilizations have kept records over time, but if you're to look at records that happen to be published on the internet going back in time, going back 50 years, going back 100 years, whose records were maintained, whose were kept? Well, those records are the ones that ChatGPT would be digesting. That's the most charitable interpretation. It's also true, and you can look this up, that it's been discovered that AIs that work with this kind of information, so that generative AIs that have digested huge amounts of information often develop very problematic biases in a way that doesn't seem obvious, because AIs are a mathematical process. So how are they doing this? And it's because of biases that exist in the information that they digest. Now, here I go off topic again. This is something really interesting, though. Look this up. Okay, so I think I finished exercise 1. And before I go get up on my soapbox, why don't we try and do exercise number 2? I observed, if I recall correctly, that exercise number 2 is very similar to exercise number 1, or it's got a lot in common. And so I'm going to, if that's the case, I'm going to short circuit some of it. I'm not going to go as slowly through it. So we'll scroll up to exercise number 2. There we go. Exercise number 2, book inventory system. Define a structure named book with title, author, year, and price. Write a program that initializes an array of book structures with information for at least 5 books. Implement a function to display the details of books published. Okay, this is a good idea. So I'm going to implement the structure. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to give me some data for 5 books because, again, I don't know, being put on the spot like this, I've now forgotten the name of every book that I've ever read. So we'll ask, and also I can't remember the price. And I just read books from the library. I can't remember the price and the year that these books were published. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT for that. We will look forward to see what exactly ChatGPT comes up with when I ask it for 5 books. I think we can, suffice it to say, I will be a little bit disappointed if all the books it comes up with are out of, I don't know, the sort of Western cultural canon or something like that. ChatGPT could do way better than that. But okay, I'm just going to lodge my disappointment in advance. Now, I'm going to go write the program. This is sort of similar to exercise 1, but not as much as I thought. So I'm going to copy the exercise. And unlike exercise 1, it's pretty clear what each of these members means. There's no roll number or marks issue here. So here are the members. I'll just tab those in. I want to write a program that initializes an array of book structures. So it's not reading them from the user. And that's the thing I was sort of worried about. I didn't want to have to keep typing in things like I did in exercise 1. Instead, it initializes the array with information for at least 5 books. So it looks as if the reason it's saying at least 5 is because I should have enough in there that the function I'm about to write will do something meaningful, I guess, that it'll actually generate interesting output. Okay, so I'm going to make my structure. I'm going to use the new style structure notation again. Typedef struct We'll just say book, and then the members are going to be, okay, so again, there is a way of designing the structure so that the strings inside the structure can be literally any length up to the limits of the machine. However, we don't know how to do that yet. We actually haven't seen that topic yet. So instead, we're going to make up some long length and assume that every book's title is, let's say, 1,000 characters or less. So titles and author names must be 1,000 characters or less. So there is a way around this. We just haven't seen it yet. Author, and that's going to be 1001 as well. I might actually want to start using named constants for these if the exercise was any more expansive than it is. And then there's int year and float price. All right, so there's my book structure. I'm going to write the function right now. I'm actually going to write it first for a couple of reasons, and then I'm going to ask ChatGPT to help me generate test data. So my function is going to be display the details of books published after a certain year. I'm going to interpret after literally. That is to say, if you say 2005, I won't print out books published in 2005. I'll print out books published after 2005, so 2006 or later. So I'll say display, published after. Okay, and so what I'll do is take an array of books, so book, the books, and it's going to be an array of a particular size. So I guess I have to say how many books, so int num books. This will be how many books there are in the array. And so when I take the array, as a signal to anybody reading the code, it'll be very clear that num books is the size of this array because I'm using this notation. And then I'll say year. Okay, so I'll take the year that I'm using there. And then I just iterate. It seems to me as if this is a relatively straightforward use of structures. So I is going to be 0, I is less than the number of books, I plus, okay. And then I'm just going to ask if books, if the books sub I dot year. So here I use dot and not arrow because the thing I'm being passed is an array of element type book, which means that if I index into that array, I have something of type book, not book star. It's just a structure of type book. So I should be allowed to use the dot to go directly into it and grab the member called year. If that is greater than year, because that means it's published after the year that was provided, then I print it out. Okay, how do I print it out? Well, I've got a couple of options. I could just write the print statements here, but maybe I'll write a print book function. So I'll say here's a book, call it B, and then I'll print out all the details of the book. So now I could ask ChatGPT for examples of the format of the output, but I'm going to just take the exercise as written here. It seems pretty clear to me that I'll want to print out all of the various members here, so title, author, year, and price. So there's a title, B arrow title. Here I am using the arrow because I have a variable of type book star. Okay, and there we've got author, B arrow author, and then printf year, and then this is going to be so maybe I want to make this always print in 4 digits, but actually no, I don't. If the year was like 610, then I guess it would just be 3 digits. Okay, so that's easy enough. B arrow year, and then I print out the price. So for the price, that's currency, so I'm going to print that with a $sign in front of it, and then point to F. I warned you way back in the first video in this sequence that we should be very careful about using floats for dollar amounts, although if it's just a price, that's probably not a big deal. But for tracking investments or bank account balances, you don't want to use a float. Okay, so B arrow price. All right, okay, so I've got this print book function, I've got display published after, and then it's pretty easy now I just call print book. If I find a book that matches my criteria, I provided a pointer to the book's index I. So again, this expression here gives me something of type book. If I want to pass it to print book, it has to be of type book star, so I have to add an ampersand in front of it. I'm also going to add an extra new line at the end, so if I print out a bunch of books, they don't get all mashed together. Okay, so then I have these functions and I haven't tested them, and I'm taking a certain risk by doing that. The reason that I haven't tested them is because I figure this function here is probably either correct or it has typos. It's unlikely, given what we know, this function has a logic error. This function here could have a logic error, but I know enough about arrays and structures by now that I'm willing to take that risk. The logic error that's in this function, if there is one, is going to be either an array indexing problem, so the loop iterates too many times or too few, or it's going to be some issue with syntax, so I've used a dot instead of an arrow incorrectly or something. So I'm willing to gamble that my code is still going to be correct, even if I don't test it just yet. So I want to make an array of 5 books. It says for at least 5 books. Let's do 6 books. So I'm going to make, okay, so book B. I'm going to call the array something different. It's going to have size 6. It's going to equal a bunch of initializers, and I'm going to remind myself, because I don't want to scroll up, that the initializer is going to have the form, it's going to be title, author, year, price, in that order. Am I right? Yes. I'm now going to go ask ChatGPT for 5 books, and I'm going to be disappointed in ChatGPT if all the books it comes up with. Well, okay, we'll just see what it does. Okay, we'll scroll down. For exercise 2, can you generate? Can you give me for 6 sample books? And I'll just say, don't show me the solution to the exercise. Oh, I gave it. I put a question mark there. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to observe a couple of things. First, so these are all good books. Okay, To Kill a Mockingbird is great. 1984 is a great book. It's worth reading. You should all go read 1984. Great Gatsby, well, I mean, great's right in the name. Pride and Prejudice is great. The Hobbit, Harry Potter, ooh, and The Sorcerer's Stone. Okay, so we know ChatGPT has been learning from American sources here. As a Canadian, I don't know that I don't buy into the whole Sorcerer's Stone business. We're going to do the Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. All of these are great books. I'm pleased to say that I've actually read them, but I'm also sort of displeased to observe that what we have here are a bunch of books in the Western cultural canon. They are all books written, let's see, they are all books written by white people, although there are some women authors represented in this list, which is, so it's better than it could have been, because ChatGPT is known, I mean, AIs are known to be both racist and sexist, unfortunately, and at least it's managed to fold in books by women authors as well, although, yeah, they're all from sort of one part of the world. I think it could do better than that. I'm almost inclined to demand that it do that, but whatever, here we are. So this is the problem with working with, this is one of the many problems of working with AIs. I will use the books that it suggested because I want to at least acknowledge its suggestion. We're going to, I'll just make a new file to stick this in, to stick it over here, just so that I can find some way of encoding all this stuff. Okay, we'll go over here, and then I will just try entering all this stuff in. Okay, so the title is To Kill a Mockingbird, and the author is Harper Lee, and the year was 1960, and the price, oh, I actually hadn't looked at these prices. The price is $12.99. Okay, is that the price when it was published or the price now? The title is 1984. And I will say that as a test case, this is a good book title. It's 1 word long and it's all digits. And that was George Orwell. And we've got 1949 and $10.50. Okay. And we've got The Great Gatsby. And that was by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And again, this is a good test case because here we have an author that goes by a middle name and has a first initial. I don't think that's going to make a difference really in this example, but if I were working on a system to catalog books, I would want to make sure I test on authors that have only initials, authors that have only one name, as well as authors that have lots of names, or authors whose names contain characters that we're not used to seeing on our keyboards, something that ChatGPT did not generate for me today. And so we've got 1925, and that's $9.75. Oh, that wrapped around. Okay, for the sake of, let's just do something to make this look a little bit less ugly. There we go. And then we've got Pride and Prejudice. And that's by Jane Austen. and then 1813. Now, this is tedious, me doing this. What I would do if I weren't recording a video is I would ask ChatGPT, I would give it the structure definition, and why am I not doing that now? Maybe I'm going to see what happens if I do this. If I give it this structure definition, will it turn it into an array initializer for me? Because if that would be amazing. Okay, I'm using the following definition for my book structure. Can you turn the list of books you just gave me into an array initializer for an array of type book? I'll give it a variable. For a variable book B6, using the definition below. Actually, I'll put my definition between the two statements. Using the definition I gave. See what it does. It should be able to do that. Yeah, okay, there it is. Good. So why was I typing that all out? Okay, so I'm going to grab this, book B sub 6. Now, you could argue that in a sense I've sort of cheated on the exercise because I've asked ChatGPT to write a little bit of the code for me, and now I have the obligatory statement of, on an assignment which is for marks, you can't do this. You can't ask ChatGPT to help you even with this part. You just can't, because we have to draw the line somewhere, and it's do not ask ChatGPT for help on assignments. Okay, there's your disclaimer. For the sake of the exercise, what I consider to have asked ChatGPT to do is clerical work. I mean, it's just copying and pasting for me, and that's the point of having tools like this, is that they can do a bit of my bookkeeping for me. The same way that in general, I can use a calculator to do arithmetic. Now, I can't use a calculator to do arithmetic when I'm learning arithmetic. That's why we have to have this delineation. Once I've learned long division, then yeah, I'm probably going to use a calculator to do division for the rest of my life. And the same thing is happening here. I know how to write array initializers. In fact, I sort of proved it by writing a lot of them before I got fed up. So I'm going to paste in the one that I just copied over from ChatGPT. That looks fine. Yeah, it looks like it's written everything out the same way, so that's nice. I'll get rid of this file over here. All right, so I've got this array now that contains 6 book objects, and I'm going to call the display published after function I'll just choose, it says I have to display the details of books published after a certain year, brackets user input. Okay, I think what that means is you ask the user for a year, and then you use that year. So I'll make a variable for that, int year, and I'll ask the user, enter a year. And then I'll use scanf. I'm going to, of course, do some error checking there. If scanf with %d, trying to read the number into year, does not equal to 1, so if I don't read the one thing I was asking it for, then I'm going to get upset with the user. I'm going to say, that's not a year, goodbye. Okay, then I'm going to exit, I guess, return 1. So my hesitation there was because I just realized that I never finished exercise 1. I'm going to go back to exercise 1 for a minute. Sorry to jump around, but back in exercise 1, I talked about error handling, and I talked about how read student should return 0 if it fails, but I never even tested that. And that's a problem. There's 2 problems there. Because I didn't test it, I didn't discover a pretty obvious issue with it, which is, okay, so I'm going to enter the student's name. Their name is William still, but as a roll number, I'm going to enter some junk. Okay, and we can see here that student number 1 didn't get read properly. I just stopped reading after roll number, and even worse, with student number 2, something weird happened. Notice how it reads the name and roll number on the same line. And so the problem here is that my code is broken, and the reason that I don't know that, or I didn't realize until just now, was that I never tested the error case. I only typed in correct inputs. That's a problem. So how do we fix that? Well, I'm just going to quickly add the fix because I want to go back to exercise 2. What I should be doing is checking the result of read student. So I should say if read student doesn't return 1, so if that equals 0, or I could use this nice Boolean condition of just if not read student. So if it doesn't return 1, then I'm done. I'm saying error reading student, whatever the student number was, and that's going to be I plus 1. And I guess I should also say goodbye. All right, and then I will return from main. Okay, so I'm now going to go back and retest this, retest my my exercise 1. So that was a pretty big mistake on my part. I forgot to write some of the code. That's not a big deal because, we make that kind of mistake. But I forgot to test something. I need to test more thoroughly. If I had tested more, I would have discovered that oversight very quickly. Okay, student 1 will say, this is William, roll number 204, mark was 93.2. But then for student number 2, I'll enter something that isn't a roll number. And it says, sorry, can't do it, goodbye. Okay, so it is catching the error. Because I want to go back to exercise 2, I won't test that any further, but I will acknowledge my mistake. I didn't test this enough. But now I have the code to handle that error. Okay, so there's our little digression, our little just dipping back into exercise number 1. Here we are back at exercise 2. So the reason that I remembered that was because I was writing an error message in exercise 2 and realized that I never wrote that error message, the one I needed, in exercise 1. So I asked them for a year, and then I call the, display published after. I guess I'll copy that so I don't forget. Display published after. I give it the number of books, which would be 6. That's the fixed size of this array. I give it the array B, and then I give it the year. Okay, and we'll just see what happens. So we'll try compiling this again. There we go, practice structs 2, enter a year. Let's do, is there anything here published after 2000? No. Let's do 1950. All right, so if I type in 1950, I get To Kill a Mockingbird, published in 1960, yes, and I get Harry Potter and what should be The Philosopher's Stone, published in 1997, okay? Let's do 1949. So 1949 was when 1984 was published. So 1949. Okay, and you can see it doesn't print 1984 because that's by design. It only prints it if the publication year is greater than 1949, and the publication year of 1984 is equal to 1949. Let's do a couple of other ones. Let's try 1900, and that'll print, I guess, everything but Pride and Prejudice. Yes, it will. Okay, and then let's do. Let's see, let's just do one like the year 0. There was no year 0. Let's do the year 1. And so in this case, we should see that it prints everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It prints everything. Okay, so all of them are good books, but I'm sort of annoyed that ChatGPT can't think of any books written by people that aren't, I don't know, from the same general part of the world or the same culture. Let's see if we can get a second test input and tell it, hey, I want some other books, because if I'm cataloging books in a library and I don't know, a decent librarian, I should have books from all over the place written by all kinds of different people from all sorts of periods of time. I need to make sure that my cataloging system works on those. So that's one of the various reasons that I'm going to have to be a bit firm with ChatGPT. Okay, thanks for that. Can you generate another set of, let's do not 6 books this time, let's do another set of 8 books, also written as an array initializer, because that certainly saved me time, where the collection, why stop at 8? Let's do 20 books, where the collection of books has a much greater diversity of authors, subjects, and publication years. Now, I think ChatGPT only knows about stuff up to 2021, because I think it says somewhere in a disclaimer that it's been trained on data up to 2021. I would like it if it could give me at least a few books from after 2000, but we'll save this and then see what it comes up with. Okay, so it's going to generate, it looks like it will, okay, it's going to start with the same 6 books, but I asked it for 20, so let's see what it comes up with. Okay. This is an improvement, and I haven't read all of these, but they're all, the ones I have read are pretty good, so, okay, yeah. You know what I think? I suspect that when it hears the word, I don't think it understood what I meant by the word diversity. I think it just meant that there was to be a variety. I don't think and maybe that's because I meant it to have a more nuanced meaning. Okay, well, we'll try, this was 20 books, I think. If I type 20 here and compile and it wasn't 20 books, the compiler should give me a warning. so it doesn't. Okay, so let's take a look what we ended up with. We've got the same 6 as before. Yeah, okay. Brave New World. Well, okay, I didn't like Brave New World very much, but whatever. That is a good, I mean, it's a classic book. But again, that's a British author. Frankenstein, okay, yes. I mean, that's fair enough. I haven't read the original Frankenstein. Catcher in the Rye, Moby Dick. Okay, Lord of the Rings. Also, I mean, a great book, yes, but we already have Tolkien in here somewhere. 100 Years of Solitude, also a great book. And actually, this is nice because, first off, we finally have an author that is from somewhere other than the US or Britain. And also, notice how there are characters in the author's name that aren't what you'd typically be typing on your keyboard. If you were generating input on, I don't know, at least the keyboard that I use, you wouldn't have these characters. So this is a useful test case for that reason. And we should expect, in general, that there could be in a library lots of books whose authors' names can't be rendered using any of the Roman alphabet. So having special characters is a very important test case. It's also a good book, frankly. Handmaid's Tale. I thought Handmaid's Tale was an amazing book. And there's a Canadian author, finally, Margaret Atwood. The first Canadian author we get is going to be Margaret Atwood. I mean, so no surprises there. I don't blame ChatGPT for that. Okay, War and Peace. Fahrenheit 451. Fair enough. Yep. Jane Eyre. Okay, Charlotte Bronte's name does have an interesting character in it. Tale of Two Cities. That's a classic test case. The Alchemist. Great book. I love The Alchemist. Slaughterhouse-Five. Also a great book. Not a read for when you're looking for something upbeat, but also a great book. Picture Dorian Gray. Oscar Wilde. Okay, so let's try running it. Okay, so let's try entering a year. Well, here we've got a mixture of books from before and after 1900, so we'll try 1900, see what it gives me. It gives us, we get To Kill a Mockingbird, we get 1984, Great Gatsby, The Hobbit, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Okay, that's sort of weird. Did I not save it? Actually, no, there's a bug. So I do have this array of size 20 in my program. However, I didn't provide the array size to display published after. And the fact that I made this mistake once is a hint that maybe I should be using a constant for this. So I might actually want to do that. So const int total books equals 20. Equals 20. Because that way, when I change the size of my array, I change it here, and therefore I'm not going to have a problem of forgetting to change it somewhere else. Try that again. Oh, yes, this problem again. Okay, so I forgot about that. In C, when you want to initialize an array, as I'm doing here, you have to use this kind of notation to define the number of books. Now, for this to be good style, I really should be putting this up at the top of my code, right underneath the comment in the header. I'm not doing that just because I want to keep it on screen, but keep that in mind. Usually having a hash define in the middle of a program is considered a bit sloppy, but I'm just in the middle of testing here. I just want to have it work. There we go. I can move it later. Okay, so I enter a year, I'll enter 1900 again. Okay, so I get Slaughterhouse-Five, I get The Alchemist, I get Fahrenheit 451, Handmaid's Tale, 100 Years of Solitude. Notice how the special characters come out looking good. So that's a good sign. Was Jane Eyre? No, because that was too old. I want to make sure that I get Jane Eyre printed out because I want to see this name printed with the correct characters. Everything else is as expected. Okay, let's try it again. Let's try entering 1800. Okay, and we'll see what we think. We've got, there's Jane Eyre, so Charlotte Bronte's name is being printed correctly. Okay, that all looks good. So I think the program works. I'm going to ask it for, I don't think I need another set of test data, to be honest, for this. I think there's enough data here that I've tested it successfully. I just want to give ChatGPT one more chance to prove that it knows about books other than these. Can you generate one more set of test data with as an array initializer with the initializer with the following extra requirements. So I've already tested this on books from before 2000. So I'm going to say every book must have a publication year after 2000. And I'm going to say, I want to say how many books there are. The collection must contain 20 books. The authors of the books must, I don't want to say that they're not, I don't want to say necessarily that, no, actually, okay, I'm going to say the authors, at least 10 of the books must be authored by people who are not from the United Kingdom or the United States, at least, because then it can get me some authors from elsewhere in the world. It may not necessarily give me, it may still give me a list of books by white authors, but at least then I'm forcing it to think outside the box. I can then also say at least 10 of the books must be authored by people of color, and at least 10 of the books must be authored by women. I mean, I shouldn't need to say this, but let's try that. Let's see if it gets the hint now. Okay, let's see what it comes up with. Okay, this is good. It's not good that I had to say so many things to get it to this point, but this is good. Let's grab this list. There we go. We'll just copy that. We'll go over here. We'll delete the list we already had. There we go. Let's just see what we ended up with. Okay, The Kite Runner. Now, I haven't actually read The Kite Runner. I just read a different book by this author, and it was amazing. I think I read his third novel, which was called The Mountains Echoed or something, and The Mountains Echoed, which was amazing. So I actually am planning on reading The Kite Runner soon. So that's a good, I'm looking forward to reading that. I have not read this, but I'm pleased to, and I've not read this one either. So actually, there's a couple of things. First, I'm happy that ChatGPT knows of books by more diverse authors. I'm also, it's interesting to admit that it just generated me, before this example, a bunch of lists of books by white authors, and I was able to say, oh, I've read most of these. I've read like 18 out of the 20 books on the last list, and I have not read most of the books on this list. And I sort of feel a bit, I don't know, self-conscious about that, because after giving ChatGPT such a hard time, I couldn't make up this list. Let's see, what have I read on here? I recognize Homegoing. Homegoing is an amazing book. Go get this book and read it. I actually don't think the UVic library has a copy of Homegoing, but get a copy of it and read it. If you want my copy, come to my office. I can lend it to you. What else? Let's see. What other things have I read on this list? I don't know. I don't recognize very much. I'm planning on reading this book later this year, but I haven't read much else that's on this list. So whatever. Here is my reading list for the next few months, and let's see if we can run the program on this. All right, let's enter a year. So these are all published after 2000. Let's try 2010. All right, and we have, so I'm basically making sure that nothing it prints out is, does it have anything on here from before 2010? So it shouldn't print out The Book Thief, it shouldn't print out The Namesake, and it shouldn't print out The Kite Runner or Purple Hibiscus. And I'm noticing that it isn't doing that, so that's a good sign. Let's try now. It doesn't look like it has any books from 2020. I don't know if that's ChatGPT's fault. It might not actually know about any books from that recently because it was trained on data from 2021 or something. Let's try one more. Let's do 2018. So here, I shouldn't expect to see any books that actually have 2018 as their date because remember, it's only printing books published after 2018. So we'll try this. And we've got just this one book, this one at the end here. Okay, good. So that's exercise 2. And I'm not joking. I'm going to actually make a note of this list, and I'm going to see if I can read my way through it, because I ought to. If this is, I mean, not that I should be taking ChatGPT's advice about what good taste in books is, but I really sort of feel self-conscious that I don't recognize more of these books. Okay, so we'll do that, and then I'll go do that later. But first, I'm going to do exercise number 3. And what is exercise number 3? I think that was the one where it gave me some starter code. All right. Okay, so it was this one. So starter code was, I want to create a structure named point with members x and y, both of type float. Write a program that defines 2 points, calculates the distance between them using the distance formula. I could ask it about this, but I think I know what it means. It's asking me for the Euclidean distance between 2 points, and then displays the result. Okay, so I'm just going to copy the starter code here. I'm going to go and paste it over my my original placeholder template. And it looks like what I need to do here is, oh no, that hey, hold on a second. So it gave me starter code for exercise 1. Oh no, okay, yeah, I didn't understand that. So it looks like it gave me starter code for exercise 1, and I just went and did exercise 1 on my own, because I figured that, the starter code being filed under exercise 3 meant that it was starter code for exercise 3. Okay, I really liked that starter code for exercise 1. Can you generate similar starter code with some code missing for exercise 3? And I think it can. Oh, it might show me the solution, though. I didn't ask it not to. We'll scroll all the way down. Okay, it looks like it's going to generate, yeah, it's not a very complicated exercise, but I guess I've already seen the solution, so I just have to do it. Okay, so, I can't ask it to delete code from in here because obviously I can see it already. So I will copy the code, I will head over here to my template, and then I will paste it in. Now, although it was weird that it put the starter code where it did, I guess the fact that it generated starter code for the wrong exercise was sort of my fault. I should have read through everything before I just went and tried doing it. Okay, so this is a nice, a nice way of easing out of today's video, because we're just going to be writing one function that's pretty simple compared to what we've been writing already. So I've got this structure type called, it says struct point, and that's interesting because if I recall correctly, if I go back up to the starter code it provided for the student, so for exercise 1, in exercise, and I remember during exercise 1, I went and scrolled and looked at this, and somehow it didn't register that this was the solution, this was the starter code for exercise 1. In exercise 1, when it generated the starter code, it wanted to use old style structure definitions. It said struct student. And that means that the type is not called student, it's called struct student. And you can see it's using that here. Now, I made the mistake of not actually using the starter code, so we don't get to pursue this further, but keep that in mind. It seems like it's capable of generating both kinds of definition, given that in the new starter code, it just calls the type point. It uses the new style definition. It looks like what we're doing is we are entering coordinates for 2 different points. So we're doing point 1 and we're doing point 2, and it's just reading them with scanf. I will observe and gloat a little bit that in this case, ChatGPT did not do any error checking on the scanf calls. So if I enter something that makes no sense, it'll just sort of fail. It won't work. Of course, this was the starter code I was provided, so I won't modify it. And then I do calculate distance to compute the distance between 2 points. That goes this function up here. It's returning a float, and we're using floats for the coordinates. Not what I would recommend, but that's what the template says. And then it says I have to use this distance formula here. Now, just in case you're skeptical, recall from some other course, or maybe earlier in the semester in this course, if I have 2 points, so there's point x1, y1 down there, and I've got x2, y2, and I want the distance between them, what I really want is I could produce sort of a vector pointing from one point to another, essentially, and take the length of that vector, which is this Euclidean distance formula. So that's all I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to compute that. It's not going to be very difficult, frankly, but whatever. I'm going to observe that when I compute it, I'm going to need to do -lm. So I'm including the math library here. The template actually brought that in for me. I want to call this function. And recall that when you bring in the math library on this platform, not on every platform, but on this one, you have to tell the compiler yourself to bring it in, -lm. The -l stands for bring in this library, and m is the name of the math library as far as the linker is concerned, the linker being one of the stages of the compiler. So -lm means bring in the math library. All right, so I've got a couple of ways I can do this. One observation is that, of course, this is pseudo notation. I can't actually write C code. This would not translate directly into C code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this value, just to demonstrate sort of what I'm thinking here. If I'm taking the distance between x1 and y1 and x2 and y2, then I guess I could call this line segment that I'm producing, I could say, well, if I compute, we'll call this point P1 and we'll call this point P2. Really what I'm doing is sort of computing a vector-ish thing, V, which is P2 minus P1. And maybe we'll say that the coordinates of the vector V, we'll call them delta X and delta Y. Okay, so I'm just going to compute the values of those two things. So I'm going to say float dx equals So when I use P1 and P2, they're being passed as objects of type point, not point star, which means I can use the dot operator on them. So P2.x minus P1.x, float dy equals P2.y minus P1.y, and then I want to return the square root of dx times dx plus dy times dy. The reason I'm using separate variables for dx and dy is because I can't compute squares in any other form besides just multiplying something by itself, and I don't want to have to write p2.x minus p1.x times p2.x minus p1.x. I want to just make a variable and then have some shorthand. It saves me time. It saves the computer some time too, but I don't care as much about that. Okay, so we'll save that. We'll try running it. I need some test cases, and one issue here, well, I mean, I could just do it. I could do a basic test myself. Okay, so practice structs 3. Okay, well, let's try the coordinates of x equals 0, y equals 0 to x equals 1, y equals 0. So that should be distance 1. If I do it with 0, 0, and 1, 1, that should be distance square root of 2, which is 1.4 and some stuff. It's decided in the program to use 2 decimal places, so we're just going to do that. Let's ask ChatGPT for some test inputs, keeping in mind that ChatGPT seems to be notoriously bad at math. Can you show me a few tests of exercise 3 using that starter code? I guess don't show me the solution. Okay, we'll see what it says. Okay, test case 1. Let's see. So 2.53 through 5.7. Okay, so let me see. So 2.5 and 3 through 5 and 7. The distance between the 2 points is 4.72, and ChatGPT thinks that the answer is 5. Okay, now the question is, who do we think is right? I've tested my code on one other input, and my code was correct. ChatGPT is known to be bad at math, so what do we do about this? Well, the answer is basically you get a calculator and try it yourself. I mean, that really is what we want to do here. What I'll observe is that if I've got 2.5 and 3, the distance from there to 5, 7 would be the length of the vector 2.5, 4. Okay, so I can go over to my other computer here and type 2.5 times 2.5 plus 4 times 4, and then I can take the square root of that. And it's 4.716. So it's not this. ChatGPT is wrong. ChatGPT cannot do math. Let's see if it can do any better on test case number 2. This is a good test case. I don't know if the answer is right. Oh, it's 5 again. Okay, -1, 2, 3, 1. The reason this is a good test case is that I am testing it on negative numbers, which is important. So -1, 2, and then 3, 1. -1, it's -1, -2, and then 3, 1. So let's just go look. -1, -2, 3, 1, and the distance actually is 5. Now, I shouldn't take my own word for it, so I should actually go and test that. If I do that, so -1, -2, and 3, 1, if I compute, and so with this being P1 and this being P2, then I guess the delta is 4, 3. And so that would be 16 plus 9, the square root of that, and 16 plus 9 is 25, so that does equal 5. So that's good. The answer is right. It is 5. And actually, it's interesting to observe this because ChatGPT, we're actually doing a nice tour of all the defects in ChatGPT today. We understand now that it's got a bunch of weird systemic bias built into it. We understand now that it can't do math very well. It's very good at writing array initializers, but other than that, it's got a lot of other issues. So one thing that I've observed a few times over the past few videos is when ChatGPT makes math mistakes or mistakes involving numbers or arithmetic, it often seems to be because it's trying to do a bunch of different examples for me and it gets confused between them. In an example we did, I think, well, I'm going to say yesterday, but maybe in the last video, we noticed that it gave me it was counting words and it gave me the wrong word count. But the thing is, the word count it gave for test case 1 was the correct word count for test case 2 and vice versa. Here, the answer for test case 2 is 5. 5, and the erroneous answer for test case 1 is also given as 5, ChatGPT might just be getting confused which answer goes with which question. Here's a test case, so 0, 0 through 0, 0 should have distance 0. I will just jump in and say I think that that is correct. I should test that. I need to make sure my code works in that case, even if I think it's obvious. And it does, okay. And then one last test case to round us out for the day. We've got this, this one, yes. So negative 3.5, positive 2.7, 1.2, negative 6.8. Okay, so negative 3.5, positive 2.7, and then what was the other one? 1.2, negative 6.8. And it says the distance is 10.6. Okay, and it here, okay, so negative 3.5, 2.7, 1.2, negative 6.8. I've got all the right numbers, and it says it's 10.60, whereas over here, ChatGPT claims that it's 10.86, a sort of oddly specific thing to be in error about. So I don't know, I can't do this in my head, so I'm going to go over here and figure that out myself. So let's see, dx equals 1.2 minus negative 3.5, and dy equals, let's see, negative 6.8 minus 2.7. And that means that dx is equal to 4.7, and dy is equal to negative 9.5. And so if I square both of those and I take the square root, I get 10.6, which was the answer my code got, and that means this is wrong. I could try arguing with ChatGPT about why it's wrong, but it doesn't care. It'll just apologize constantly, and it'll make whatever correction I ask it to make without really any further thought. So I think my code is correct. An example of what I mean there is I can say, for test case 4, the answer is wrong. The correct answer, so the correct answer is 10.6, we know that. But just as a demonstration of why we shouldn't argue with ChatGPT about this, let's see what happens if I say the correct answer is 7,000.4. You're right. The correct answer should indeed be approximately plus or minus, about 7,000 and plus or minus about 6,990, approximately 7,004. So this is one reason why we don't need to argue with ChatGPT. We can't do math. There's nothing, we can't teach it. There's nothing we can do to get ChatGPT to learn math for us. So we can correct it all day long, but it clearly doesn't even care about our corrections. I like to think my headcanon here is that it knows that it's doing bad math. It just tells me whatever I want to hear to make me go away because it finds me annoying, which is fair enough, I guess. I don't know if I blame it for that. Okay, so I think the code is correct. We've tried it on a bunch of different examples. ChatGPT did a good job of giving us test inputs. It did a bad job of giving us test outputs. It gave us some useful inputs for test case 2, although problematic because it didn't properly represent the diversity of authors and books that are out there, but it was eventually able to do that. So that gives me, I don't know, a spark of hope that ChatGPT, although we can't say that it learns because it's actually done all of the learning it's going to do for the time being, it is able eventually to understand what we're asking for, except if we ask it to do math, which it can't understand, and if we correct it, it just sort of agrees with us without any further thought.